Welcome back, photography students. Let's start the lesson by defining what a camera actually is.
A camera is simply a light-tight box with a lens. At the focal plane of that lens is a sheet of light-sensitive film. This is how an image is formed by light rays. Light reflected from, say, the nose of the fish enters the lens where it is refracted and brought into focus on the film.
That's right. A camera is a light-proof box. That's it. With only two ways for light to get in. One way is the aperture, the other way is the shutter. Here is the aperture in the lens, and here is the shutter in the camera body. So light passes through both of these portals like an Indiana Jones temple to reach the light-sensitive surface inside the camera. This is what the aperture looks like inside your lens. It's basically a series of blades that spiral open or closed to make a bigger or smaller opening. This is what the shutter looks like. As I said, it's a door with shutter blades. It opens and it closes. That's it. Very simple. In this lesson, I'm going to break down what the shutter and aperture actually do and what each effect has on your pictures with lots of visual examples and a minimum of jargon. Let's start with the aperture, which is in your lens. The aperture controls depth of field, which is a fancy way of saying how much of your picture will be in focus. Sometimes you want everything to be in focus, and sometimes you only want a narrow zone to be in focus. Here are a couple of examples. This is an example of shallow depth of field, meaning only a narrow zone of the image is in focus, everything else is blurry. This is an example of extreme depth of field, meaning everything is in focus. Don't worry about how this happens just yet. Just know that this is what the aperture does for you. It controls how much of your picture is in focus. Okay, let's look at the shutter now, which is in the camera body. As I said, the shutter is a door. It opens and closes. The shutter controls how much you freeze the action you are photographing. A slower shutter speed means more blur, and a faster shutter speed means you are freezing the action. So, on to the examples. This photo is an example of a slow shutter speed. As the carnival ride moves, it leaves an impression of light on the photosensitive surface in the camera, which creates this blurry effect. And then there are the pictures that are blurry when you don't want them to be, like this picture, which is of a local boat parade. I tried to hand-hold the camera while taking pictures of the boats, and, well, you can see how well that turned out, right? What happened was the camera left the shutter open such a long time to compensate for the lower light levels that it picked up the camera movement in my hands. And this was the result. For pictures with light levels this low, you really do need a tripod to keep the camera steady. This is an example of fast shutter speed. The shutter was open so briefly that the action did not have time to get blurry, so therefore everything is frozen in time. Pretty nifty, huh? Sometimes you want some blur in your pictures. Why would you want that? Well, when you want to have a sense of motion in your pictures, and here is a perfect example. Having a longer shutter speed causes water to have a nice, eye-pleasing blur, as in this self-portrait. This is a self-portrait I took in a local watering hole in upstate New York years ago. I set my camera up on the beach towel, set a slow shutter speed and a self-timer, and I kept very still, and this is the result. This is another example. The motion of this fire dancer gives him a much more dramatic, blurred effect. The picture just would not have had as much impact if he was perfectly in focus. It would look like he was just standing there, posing stiffly. Other times, you want the fastest shutter speed you can get, such as in this thrill ride. Every water droplet is frozen in time, making the image very dramatic. So, that is the difference between a slow shutter speed and a fast shutter speed. And here is a handy diagram that explains both concepts to make it easier for you to visualize the two ways you control your camera. And all of these diagrams are going to be available for your reference whenever you need them. Okay? Two ways, shutter, aperture. That's not so bad, right? Just remember, aperture equals zone of focus. Shutter equals freezing the action. That's it. Let's continue.